Good morning. My name is Suzanne Barber. I'm the AT&T Endowed Professor in Engineering and the Director for the Center for Identity here at the University of Texas. On behalf of Professor Bobby Chesney, who regrets that he wasn't able to join us this morning, but I think we'll be here later in the day. Professor Chesney is a professor of law and the director of the Robert Strauss Center for International Security and Law at the University of Texas. On behalf of Professor Chesney and myself, welcome here to campus. We're happy to have you, and we're happy for you to be here at this very timely event. Just to tell you a little bit about the two organizations, the Center for Identity is a center for excellence in identity management, security, and privacy. We offer both research and education solutions for consumers as well as working professionals, organizations, corporations, government agencies, and so forth. To give you a little hint of a couple of new things that we're doing at the center, we just launched the master's degree for identity management and security. We're accepting applications now, and the first cohort starts in the spring. That program is designed for working professionals and is very multidisciplinary, trying to get at all the challenges associated with identity management and security. The other is the ID 360 scorecard program, where the center helps an organization evaluate its risk and liabilities for both insurance purposes as well as communicating to consumers about the trusted ways in which that organization manages, protects their PII or their personal identifiable information. The Strauss Center is a national leader in the study of national security, privacy, and international relations as it relates to cybersecurity. Professor Chesney and I asked both of you to visit the Strauss Center website and the Center for Identity website, learn more about what we're doing in terms of programs and events that happen throughout the year. Well, I guess you already know about this terrific event today, and we're happy to be sponsoring this event, but this event is brought to you by the Federal Trade Commission. Come to Austin and help us in thinking about how to start with security. The FTC has emerged in recent years as an extremely critical player in promoting best practices as related to cybersecurity. There have been more than 50 FTC enforcement actions, each one seemingly of higher profile and significance than the last. By any measure, the FTC is a critical regulator, offers fabulous expertise and guidance, and we are very proud to partner with the FTC today, as well as the Austin's own Capital Factory, in bringing today's event to you. You're definitely in for a real treat. There's a remarkable lineup of experts from across industry and government that are ready to talk about really the special challenges that we face for cybersecurity and in particular for tech startups. So without further ado, let me introduce Dama Brown, who is the Regional Director of the Southwest Region for the Federal Trade Commission. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi there. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And thank you so much to the University of Texas at Austin for hosting us, for co-sponsoring the event with us today. My name is Dama Brown, and I am the Regional Director of the Southwest Regional Office of the FTC, and that is located here in Texas, in Dallas. And I'm really pleased to be here today. I know it's a really gray and a little bit dreary day, but I think we're in for a lot of great information, and I'm excited to be here, and I hope you guys are too. I'm grateful for my fantastic colleagues over in our headquarters in the Federal Trade Commission who have worked with the Robert Strauss Center and organized today's program, Start with Security. And this is the second in a series of events that the FTC has put together and is holding around the country to provide and explore tips and strategies for implementing effective data security. Start with Security is not just the title of today's program, but it's actually its theme. And in fact, I think you would say that the Start with Security logo is the mantra of the FTC attorneys who work on data security issues. Whether it's customer databases or personnel files, sensitive information pervades every part of organizations throughout the country. In an era where data breaches are larger and more frequent than ever, business executives are often asking us what they should be doing to manage the confidential information that they receive. And experts all agree on the very first step. And no surprise, it's this. It's start with security. It's the title, again, of today's program, and we'll be talking about it throughout the day. So we will be talking about how to build a culture of security, how to design effective and scalable security plans, how third-party sources affect data security, and ways to embrace security features and tools. We're going to be hearing from experts in the field of information technology, data security, compliance, and research. The FTC is actually an agency that's over 100 years old right now. We are going into our 101st year, and we have a key role to play in this discussion because it has been the chief federal agency on privacy protection and enforcement since as far back as the 1970s. And that's when we began enforcing one of the first federal privacy laws, which was the Credit Fair Reporting Act. Since the 1970s, there's been a lot of changes in technology, and more privacy challenges have been raised. But the FTC's overall approach on this issue has been consistent. We use our law enforcement tools, policy initiatives, and consumer and business education to help protect consumers and their personal information. Our work has culminated in more than 130 enforcement actions that involve spam, spyware, and privacy issues, and including since 2002, more than 50 cases that are particular to data security alone. And these are all cases where unfair or deceptive practices have put consumers' personal information at risk of being misused. Our work has also included rulemaking and policy initiatives that are designed to help protect consumers, and we do workshops and outreach events like today to talk to consumer and business groups. The FTC is really an amazing agency. It's very collaborative and collegial. I'm really fortunate to work there. It is, in fact, been declared one of the best federal agencies to work for this year. So if you're looking for work, keep your eye out on USA Jobs because it really is a terrific place. Nonetheless, despite the collaboration that we have in our agency, we also have some really keen leadership at the top. And we have some folks with very strong vision of what the agency should be doing and how we can protect consumers. Our agency is led by 4 presidentially appointed commissioners: Edith Ramirez, Julie Brill, Maureen Olhausen, and Terrell McSweeny. And we're really honored to have Commissioner McSweeny here to talk about an issue that she has a very keen interest in. Commissioner McSweeny was sworn in as a commissioner in April of 2014. Before joining the commission, she had served a number of prominent public service roles. She was the chief counsel for competition policy and intergovernmental relations for the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division. And between 2009 and 2012, she served as a deputy assistant to the president and the domestic policy advisor to the vice president. And she provided advice on a variety of policy issues. She also served as then Senator Joe Biden's deputy chief of staff and the policy director in the U.S. Senate and counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee. She's a graduate of Harvard Law and Georgetown University Law School. Harvard University and Georgetown University Law School. So we're really delighted to hear from her, and I think she'll give you a lot of information and insight about the agency, what our priorities are, and what as business leaders you should be thinking about as it relates to security.
Thank you, Dama, for that really kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. Sorry it's a gray day, but we're going to have a lot of fun today, so I hope you're ready for this. I have to start by thanking the University of Texas Strauss Center and the Center for Identity for co-sponsoring and hosting us today, and also the Capital Factory of Austin for helping spread the word about the event. We are really excited to be here. As Dama mentioned, this is the second in a series of events that the FTC is hosting around the country to promote our Start with Security initiative, which is a guide that I really hope you have a chance to take a look at. We have copies of it outside that is based on the best practices and not so great practices that we've uncovered in more than 50 enforcement cases involving data security. It's a wonderful plain English explanation of really some of the points that we're going to be talking about today, what it means to really build security by design into your products. I have to tell you, I am absolutely thrilled to be here to help kick off this event, partly because I am the daughter of a Texan. I was not born in Texas, and I live with this shame of not having been born here. But I grew up with a deep appreciation of the rich culture of Texas. And, my mom is from San Antonio, but I have come to appreciate Austin as well from having family and friends here. And, it's amazing to me to take a look at what a critical center of technology Austin has become in the last few years. So it makes total sense that as part of our inaugural events around the country, we would be coming here to Austin. I probably don't have to tell anybody in the room, but I was surprised to learn and pleased to see that Austin attracted more than $265 million in venture capital in the first quarter of 2015 alone. So I think that underscores the surge of activity here in Austin. Through many of the innovative startups here, you are transforming the lives of millions of consumers. Thanks to you, we can track our fitness goals, get on-demand shopping coupons, have a personal shopper do our grocery shopping from our favorite local stores, find vacation rentals, have shopping errands run in under an hour. So truly, it is really the center of a bunch of incredibly innovative, consumer-facing pieces of technology. I think Austin needs no introduction in this regard, obviously, but it's my job this morning to take the opportunity to introduce you a little bit more fully to the Federal Trade Commission. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what we do and building on what Dama was talking about. The FTC is 101 years old, which is a little bit unusual for an independent commission in our government. Typically, other than the Fed, I don't think they've lasted that long. But we persevere as the nation's consumer protection agency. A core part of our mission is protecting consumers' privacy, including making sure companies are keeping consumer data secure. We've been doing that, as Dama pointed out, for a number of years. But as consumers have increasingly migrated from a brick-and-mortar world to an online and interconnected one, we found that our responsibilities regarding privacy and security have really increased over the last decade. We've brought law enforcement actions. These are civil enforcement actions when we believe that a company has failed to take reasonable steps to secure consumers' data, and we've done more than 50 cases specifically on data security alone. But we also engage in reaching out to the business community and thinking creatively about solving security challenges and providing adequate information about what we think the best practices are in this highly dynamic space. You don't have to be a security expert to know that insecure software can have a devastating impact on consumers. In recent months, we have heard about attacks on online dating services, on Bitcoin exchanges. Researchers have revealed vulnerabilities in everything from connected vehicles to connected tea kettles. I don't know if you saw this in London. This was a very interesting attack. That really underscore that there are a wide range of security practices in a highly dynamic Internet of Things space. We also did a study of the Internet of Things, which we released last year, that also similarly found this sort of wide range of understanding around security practices and the value that they really can bring to your product. So we think that consumers are starting to catch on here. Recent data indicates that consumers are deeply concerned about problems of identity theft. They are deeply concerned about the security of products that they may be introducing into their lives. They don't necessarily understand a huge amount about how connected a product is or what the vulnerabilities might be. But at the core here is consumer trust, which is a really important value. And it's actually critically important for adoption as well. So consumers are concerned. There's a lot of high-profile activity around the potential vulnerabilities. So I think it underscores the need for this kind of discussion now more than ever. Unfortunately, as our enforcement work has shown, not all startups have started with security. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today, but let me give you a couple of examples. In a recent case against Snapchat, the Commission alleged that the company deceived consumers about the privacy and security of the features of its application. Although the company promised that messages sent through the app would disappear forever, the app's design failed to live up to this claim. The complaint alleged, in this case, that the app saved video messages to a location on the device outside the app sandbox, making the videos easily accessible through common file browsing tools. And additionally, the complaint alleged that unofficial third-party apps could connect to Snapchat's API, making it trivial to download and save messages indefinitely. So the ephemerality of this was not actually totally part of the product design. So the FTC alleged here that that deceived consumers. It misled them, and Snapchat agreed to establish a comprehensive privacy program and to undergo independent privacy audits for the next 20 years. I think the lesson here is clear. When you're offering privacy or security features and marketing them, you need to ensure that your product lives up to its advertised claims. In another case, the Commission alleged that this startup Credit Karma deceived consumers with respect to security of sensitive personal information transmitted through its mobile apps. According to the complaint, Credit Karma promised that it would use SSL encryption to secure Social Security numbers, which is great, dates of birth, credit report information, that kind of thing, and other sensitive financial information that its apps collected and processed. However, Credit Karma failed to implement SSL properly, turning off a critical process known as SSL certificate validation. So due to this failure, anyone could intercept the sensitive personal information that Credit Karma's apps transmitted. When a user warned Credit Karma of this flaw, the company acted to fix the issue in its iOS app. However, the company went on to release its Android app with the same vulnerability, demonstrating a failure to integrate security into its development process. In the settlement with the FTC, Credit Karma agreed to establish a comprehensive security program and undergo an independent security audit for the next 20 years. I hope they don't repeat this mistake. I think the lesson from this case is also relatively clear. In the rush to innovate, privacy and security cannot be overlooked, even in a fast-paced, highly dynamic startup environment. So how do you start with security? Well, law enforcement against companies that place consumer data at risk is a priority. Another critical part of the FTC's mission is helping businesses avoid these problems in the first place through our outreach efforts. We have a number of resources to help companies bake in privacy and security into their products and services, otherwise known in our shorthand as privacy by design or security by design. We provide general guidance, we provide specific resources, and we are available to help answer questions, and I hope you take advantage of that either today or going forward. You know, the Start with Security Guide for Business, which we are talking about today in detail, distills 10 lessons learned from our data security settlements. For example, the guide urges companies to avoid bad practices. These might seem fairly straightforward, especially if you're a security expert, but we've brought cases involving these facts. Don't store your passwords in a file marked passwords. Don't take PII and leave it on hard drives that you're reselling or in jump drives spread around your office in an unsecured way. Also, part of the history here is also don't take the PII in a paper form and throw it in a dumpster. That's also a bad idea. You know, take a look at well-known vulnerabilities. If you are not assessing for vulnerabilities and not addressing them when you find them, especially if they're well-known ones, that can be problematic. And you know, we encourage you to think about from the beginning of a product development what the best practices are and be mindful of them and start integrating them relatively early in the process. We think by making conscious choices about the kinds of information to collect, how long to keep it, how you might use it, how you need to secure it, you can greatly reduce the risk of data compromise down the road. So I think this is underscoring the critical role that human beings play in this kind of innovation. Having people who are conscious about security built into your organization early and empowered to reflect security and privacy values can be a very important contribution to avoiding risks down the road. We understand, and we'll talk a little bit more about this today, that it's difficult to achieve all of perfect security, and I think you'll hear FTC attorneys say that our standard here is not perfect security, but reasonable security. We recognize that you can have the best practices in place and still suffer a hack or an attack and a breach. And so, again, the standard here is the reasonable security, the best practices, and trying to do the right thing and being responsive to a highly dynamic environment. Some of the steps you can take are restricting access to networks and databases to only those who need it for their job. You can reduce the risk of compromise from, by a particular employee if you don't have every single employee in your organization with administrative access, unless that's absolutely necessary. We recognize that you might have a highly mobile workforce, but really thinking about how to allow employees to log in and get work done anywhere by providing secure access is an important part of making sure that your network remains secure. We also asked you to think about the endpoint security of your employees' devices and consider using technologies like multi-factor authentication to secure them. And our guide reminds companies that security isn't really a one-time effort, but an ongoing process that requires continuous evaluation and updating. So we encourage businesses to put procedures in place to keep the security of your environment current and address any vulnerabilities as they arise. For example, in our case against TJX, the FTC alleged that the companies didn't update its antivirus software, increasing the risk that hackers could exploit known vulnerabilities or overcome the business's defenses. I think that serves as an important reminder that outdated software can undermine security. The solution is to have reasonable procedures in place, again, and to regularly update and patch third-party software to help reduce the risk of compromise. Our guide is also, I should note, distributed in English and Spanish. It is available today. It is available on our website. And we hope you can gather valuable information from it and share it with friends and colleagues. We are excited, I think, to have a number of panels, and I don't want to hold up the discussion where we're going to take a deeper dive into these issues today. And I am looking forward to the conversation. I want to commend you also for taking the time to have that conversation today, because I think it really demonstrates the important first step of valuing security in your organization. Coming here, talking about these issues, participating in this discussion really demonstrates your commitment to this work, and it's a shared mission, I think, that we all have to protect the consumer information, protect consumers from breaches and other vulnerabilities, and make products that are safe so that people will trust them and want to use them. So thank you for being here today. Thank you again for hosting the FTC. We really appreciate it, and I'll really look forward to the discussions. I don't know if it falls to me to welcome panel one or to Laura or what, so I'll turn it over to you and your capable hands.
That's right. Okay. Good morning. Well, thank you, Commissioner McSweeny, and thank you, Dama and Dr. Barber, for the warm welcome here in Austin. I am from our Washington, D.C. office and just got a little taste of Austin hospitality in the last 24 hours. And wow, you guys have a lot to offer here. I will be back. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Laura Van Druff. I am an attorney with our Division of Privacy and Identity Protection at the Federal Trade Commission, and I will be moderating this morning's first panel, which relates to building a culture of security at startups. Over the next hour, we're looking forward to talking about how founders, executives, and employees can contribute to making security a core value, how to build security expertise, leveraging the security community, common vulnerabilities and how training can mitigate the risks of those vulnerabilities, and using threat modeling and secure frameworks to reduce those risks. I'm pleased today to be joined by an esteemed panel of security thought leaders, all of whom, Chris, please don't laugh about that, all of whom call Austin home, or Austin and its environs home. And so to my left is the very humble, apparently, Christoph Borg. He's Vice President of Engineering Operations at RetailMeNot, which is headquartered here in Austin, and Chairman of Borg Solutions. Chris is a veteran of the high-tech industry and specializes in understanding and forecasting technology trends for real-world applications. To his left is Alan Daines, Dell's Chief Information Security Officer and Executive Director of the company's Compliance and Information Security Organization. Alan's based in Dell's headquarters, just up the road in Round Rock, and he and his team manage risk, maintain compliance, and secure the enterprise environment. And to Alan's left is Josh Sokol, who is Information Security Program Owner at National Instruments, also here in the area. Josh manages all compliance, security, architecture, risk management, and vulnerability management activities for the company. Josh was also recently reelected to the Global Board of Directors of the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP, an online community dedicated to web application security, and about which I expect we'll hear more this morning, both on this panel and subsequent panels. But before we begin, and I appreciate that we're going to have people coming in and out of the room today, it would be helpful to our panel and to the folks who will succeed us later today to know who's in our audience. So if I could ask you by a show of hands to let me know who here is a company founder or executive. Okay. How about a software engineer? Terrific. Representing from venture capital firm. And how about lawyers and compliance officers? Terrific. All right. I am one of you. Of course, so we should acknowledge, of course, that we have people who are viewing today's program on the webcast. So the representation of the room doesn't in any way represent who is going to be viewing today's program, either live or in its archive. So it's been said, including by members of this panel, that a product is only as secure as the weakest developer who's contributing to the code. So let's start with the role of corporate culture in promoting security. How can corporate culture contribute to the development of secure products? I'll toss that up to our panel.
I'll take that. Dell has a large corporate culture, obviously.
We have no shortage of microphones.
I'm obviously very
good.
quiet and timid. So I'll take that. Dell has a fairly large corporate culture, obviously, and it's a big challenge. We have a very diverse workforce. We do extensive product development in many, many, many different business units, and part of the challenge is ensuring that consistency and how we do that across the company. Where we're developing hardware products over here in one business unit we don't want it to be, but could become very different in the way they develop that in a software business unit or a go-to-market service that we're taking to our customers. So what we've really tried to do is through my organization is drive a centralized cybersecurity organization that is focused on being a governance to consistently have secure development lifecycle practices across the company. Now, the challenge with that is part of my role is to ensure that the senior executive level, we all buy in and agree on that. And so when you think about company culture, it really has to come from the top. I've got very, very smart engineers and consultants, but they aren't going to be successful if they're trying to drive that at their peer level. It really has to be a message that is understood and acknowledged at the senior executive level and then pushed down.
So, you mind if I
don't know, and in fact, Josh, if I could just ask you what the role of employees may be in building a culture of security, in addition to making sure that it's a value at the top, as Alan indicated, can employees contribute to that culture?
Yeah, so one thing that I would say is that while it's certainly easier to drive from the top down, and it's very important to have that executive level support, in my organization, when I first started doing security, there was no security. It was very much, even though NI has been around for a number of years, there wasn't any security culture. And so I had to actually build that culture. And the way that I did is by finding champions in our organization. I found the developers who had that interest in security. I found the IT people who had that interest in security. And I said, hey, let's all get together. Let's talk about security things. And what we did is we tried to drive this culture actually from the bottom up and get people interested in security, get people feeling it. And then as a result of that, it's slowly spread. It's kind of ironically like a virus, right? And as people start to feel it, it just kind of intermingles, and eventually it gets to a point where senior management can't deny it. Security is now a part of the culture of the company.
Well, Chris, in terms of small companies, I'd like to talk about integrating security before a company goes to scale. In a company that uses consumer information, for example, and that was the focus of Commissioner McSweeney's remarks, why is it important to secure that data even before the company goes to scale?
Well, it's important because security has to be thought from the beginning. If not, you will end up with a massive amount of Band-Aid, and hopefully that happened before a breach can happen. But going from the beginning and working with the engineers, and the way we've done it is gamify the whole security aspect of the software engineering. I mean, every nerd out there that's coding, for some of you that have startups, play games. And everybody gets excited about, we're going to do X, Y, Z for the customer. It's really going back to like, yeah, it's great, but what if you were playing, I don't know, one of those crazy games, and it says you have a bounty to break it down or steal the information and all that. And as you develop and whiteboard all that, that allows to really get everybody on board and start create that habit of constantly poking hole, asking question, and making sure you just get what you need, because you don't want to go overboard as well, but keeping it secure and keeping it in the mind of people.
So Alan, are there efficiencies associated with integrating security in design? Is it cheaper, for example, to design a product securely than to find and fix vulnerabilities after it ships?
Yes, significantly. And we've got several pieces of analysis that we've done. There's no real hard data, but it's anything from 4+ times cheaper to build security into the design. That we're trying to make it as objective as possible as we try to continue to mature our SDL program within the organization. And when we're in a situation where we're coming to teams because we're engaged at the very last minute, it could literally be, we're going to launch this product tomorrow. We need security to sign off on this. We need privacy to sign off on this. And at no point during the development process did they engage us, and we come in at the 11th hour, and it's a scramble for doing a penetration test and doing an analysis, understanding what they're doing. We find something significant. We have been at the point where we have stopped ship product, and it has been 6 months to resolve. And that has been very senior executive level conversations of, we have found these vulnerabilities, they are significant, you cannot launch this product. If you do, you must document and accept that risk, but here are the potential repercussions. And when we go through that level of formality, they always want to stop the product. And to the most extreme, it's days, weeks, months. The worst has probably been about 6 months. And you think about the cost of stopping a major Dell product launch for 6 months, it's significant. And all they have to do is engage us at the beginning of the process. And that some of those light bulb moments have helped force us earlier into the development planning process.
So that's instructive, Dell's experience. I'm curious, though, taking it back to a small company, and Chris, in advance of today's program, we talked a little bit about this. So for a company whose near-term goal is to secure venture capital, are there business risks to not designing products securely?
Yes, definitely business risk. Because okay, I'll get closer. There's definitely business risk because going out, if you're a VC, having a product that is insecure and the risk that it implies to your own investment is tremendous. Therefore, going back and also having open conversation with your VC firm and explaining why you have to take a little bit longer or do it right versus just going out quickly is very important. And that constant communication at all levels, so it's not just working with engineers, but everybody understands, just like Alan was saying, what are the trade-offs and what is the impact of doing it. And so everybody's on board, and always they will come back and say, yes, let's wait, because the risk is too great.
So I expect that Commissioner McSweeny is going to address this at our lunchtime fireside chat, but I think that's a helpful perspective. Are there also business opportunities in a company that integrates security at the outset? Does that make a business case to venture capital?
I do believe so, yeah. I collect my thoughts, sorry. Too many things. Yes, on the onset, having the secure approach also allows the company and the VCs to be on the same footing, and sometimes can find very interesting new approaches to the issues and to the product that will make it very different and more competitive. So it's not just of a CYA move, but sometimes it can also lead to new innovation in a space that will benefit them at the end of the day from the investment and as well as, of course, the founders.
One of the things that you're also going to see is a lot of these startups are doing cloud-based technologies, and risk in the cloud, it's far greater, I think, than if you kind of have everything behind your own firewall, not connected to the internet or whatever. And so it becomes really important with these cloud-based technologies to assess your risk in advance, because as soon as you open that door up to customers, now all of a sudden your customers have expectations around how you're going to protect their data in the cloud. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important as a startup to be thinking about that, you know, if you're hosting in this cloud environment, to be protecting that environment.
So we've talked quite a bit about risks and about making sure that, you know, a company values security as a core value of the company. But can secure development really be considered, or I should say, can security be considered a business risk in evaluating whether a product should be launched, whether a product should even be designed? Now, I'm sorry, Josh, can you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I took on very early on when I was tasked with risk management at National Instruments was risk management. And the whole goal of that was to try and figure out a way to communicate between the business and the technical people who are in our environment. And I ended up actually writing a tool, releasing it free open source to the community called Simple Risk, because I felt like it was very, very important for people to have access to tools to be able to do risk management. So, you know, from my perspective, getting people to talk about risk in their environment, knowing what those risks are, having a system to actually document what the risks are, and then being able to drive that visibility up to the executives in the organization so that they can be determine what the issues are, what they're going to accept, what they're going to, you know, mitigate, whatever, and then driving that accountability up to the right people is critical for any organization. If they don't have visibility, they can't provide, you know, any sort of risk acceptance, and, you know, ultimately those risks are just skeletons in the closet waiting to be uncovered.
Okay, well, this is a helpful discussion. It segues nicely. Josh, you mentioned at the outset that one of the first things that you did when you got to National Instruments was to identify security champions. I think at each of your companies today, you have security engineers or folks who certainly have expertise in security, but how does a smaller company integrate security and design without dedicated security engineers?
Yeah, I can take that. It's really that part of making security less dreary feeling that people always, when they think about security, they think that, oh, this is going to be painful. Yeah. it's gamify it, make it interesting and exciting, and sometimes it means playing one engineer's team against another engineering team. Let's poke at each other. Let's figure out, bring a little bit of that negativity, because it's important to poke holes. And I think the gamifying removes the aspect of, oh, you're just poking at my project and I don't like you now. It really helps getting everybody on the same page and thinking about security. And it's not just about security, but also making sure that you are, if you talk about information we gather from the users, are we gathering the information we need and not more than that? Because in this day and age, it's very easy to get excited. It's like, I can get all that wealth of information, but are you going to use it? Because that leads also to an extra risk, whereas if you start to not having that security aspect, you're going to start gathering more information. First, you shouldn't, because if you don't use it, you don't need it. But also, you need to secure it as well, which increases the cost of your business and all the security procedures that goes around it.
There is a wealth of resources out there for anybody who's looking to do secure development. We mentioned that I'm on the board of directors for the OWASP Foundation. That is OWASP's mission, is to educate people on security, and they have tons and tons of tools and documentation on how to do pen tests and how to develop securely and things like that. Locally, we have an OWASP chapter that meets on a monthly basis. We have ISSA, which meets on a monthly basis. You guys are very, very lucky in that the security community here is huge. They talk, they like to meet, they like to get together, and I would highly encourage, even if you're not the security person, participate in those things, or encourage the developers to participate in those things, or even executives can participate in those things. Take advantage of those free resources that are out there and available to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that there is a wealth of information out there, but going back to the key point that you made, how do you encourage people whose job it isn't to be a security person or a security champion to be a developer, to develop securely, I should say, and that's kind of part of the challenge, that if you aren't building that mindset as a company, and you aren't, as a small organization where you've got one or two people that do maybe all of IT, and you've got a handful of people that do development, and everybody has shared responsibilities, how do you get that mindset in there? And I think it has to come from the CEO, the founder. There has to be a mutual understanding as an organization. You're 10 people, it's very easy for you to go have a group conversation. It's not like you're dealing with thousands of people and you've got to get everybody on the same page. When there's a really small company, I think you can have that conversation, but it has to be driven and it has to be understood that security is important, because even at Dell, we acquire large companies, we acquire small companies, and we still see we've acquired a small, wherever they are, based startup that has a small culture, that they aren't mentally thinking about security because they're so focused on, they've got a product and they're trying to get that to market, and they're trying to develop and they're trying to get features in there, and they're not thinking as a team about the security implications. And if that isn't being thought of as a collective, because you aren't going to have somebody in a 5, 10, 15, 20 person organization that's a CISO or has security responsibilities. So you have to, as a collective, make a commitment that, okay, it may take us 5% longer to do everything if we're going to inject security processes in our development lifecycle and everything that we do. If we're going to threat model, if we're going to do static code analysis, whatever that may be, that does slow us down. It may slow us down 5%, but we all need to be understanding that that's really important to go do, and that's a commitment that we're going to make as a company. Because without that, you don't have the CISO like myself or the team here that's going and banging a drum and saying, here are the standards, here are the policies, here is everything that you're going to go do, and I'm going to be the governance, and I'm going to have checkpoints, and I'm going to hold you accountable.
Yeah, the other part is also how you develop your culture at the company. Is making sure to avoid always being the one who push down for, no, you can ship this. It's like when you onboard engineers, like we have part of our onboarding is a definition, and we talk about what is our security practice, what are the OWASP top 10. So everybody knows about it from the beginning as they come on board. And then it's also the part of the continued education where we have what we call tech talks, where will talk about security. Delphi Tech talks about these things. There's one of my guys over there, and he does those. And so that's very important to keep that culture going without having, at the beginning, a staff is pique the interest.
And I'd like to talk some more about training because I think that that's a critical part of this. But before we move on to that, I'm interested, Alan, and really all of you, when you talk about security being sort of everyone's responsibility because it is part of the culture, what happens to accountability? Where security is everyone's responsibility, is there a risk that it will become no one's responsibility? Chris, do you want to field that?
Yeah. But, when you're in charge, saying, the buck stops here. Right. And so it's making sure, and I know that sometimes I'm sure you feel the same way, it's like herding cats. But it's keep reminding why it's important, why we're doing it, and what is the impact of not doing it. Unfortunately, mankind has a tendency to only react when there's big problem and fear. So once in a while, that fear needs to happen. And so sometimes we have to be.
Yeah, I think that this is the area where having a proper risk management framework comes in very, very handy. Mm-hmm. Because what needs to happen is, while it's everybody's job to think about security and to think about the risks in their environment, it's not necessarily everybody's job to accept those risks. And so if you have a proper risk management framework in place, it's up to those developers to recognize where there's a problem, highlight it in the risk management system, and then somebody at the executive level is going to go, they're going to see that, and then it's their responsibility to determine what's going to happen. And so if you have that proper framework in place, you've got the right infrastructure to make sure that that process is driving up the executive chain, like Alan had said.
Right, you make it objective and make it tangible, I think, is because I 100% agree on the risk-based approach. You've got to help people understand where bad decisions have potential implications, but make it tangible in such a way they understand what that means. It's, if you launch this, here is what could potentially happen, and here's how likely that is to happen, and here's how damaging that would be to our brand. Because it's easy to go have a security conversation with a security person and say, hey, you've got X, Y vulnerabilities, it's going to be exploited this way, that way, and the other way. You go have that with non-security, non-IT people that don't think that way. That doesn't mean anything. And we've struggled with that for years at Dell, but it's no different to anywhere else. It's if you can't go translate the problem into a language that they understand with the repercussions that they understand, they're not really going to care. They're just going to hear that security is saying that this is really bad and security is saying no. And the problem that we then have is, well, every time we go talk to security, they confuse us with this security mumbo jumbo we don't really understand. And guess what? We're going to try and go around security and not engage them anymore. Where we'd rather be, we want you to engage us from the very beginning. We want to help you. We want this to be a painless process. And we're going to help work through this versus you see us as a security roadblock that's going to stop you doing your product, that's going to stop you launching, and it's going to delay us X period of time.
I would also say, for a minute, if you're a developer in this room or you're a security person in this room, take a second, think about all the risks in your environment, right? And you can feel that weight coming down your shoulders as you start to think about all those issues. Now think about like a magical system where you can just put all those things into there and somebody else is going to decide what you're going to do with that. It's no longer your job to figure out what's going to happen with those. It's somebody else's job to figure out whether that's going to be funded, whether there's going to be people allocated towards it, whatever. That should make you feel a little bit better. It should help you sleep a little bit better at night. That's what risk management is all about. From the individual contributor level, it is all about getting those risks into a system so that somebody else can see them and make those decisions for you, because you don't have the power to change that. You're going to be the one who's actually going to do the work, but you don't have the power to make the decision that we're going to spend time here instead of here. So that's risk management is critically important for that, and it gets that weight off your shoulder. It helps you sleep much, much better at night.
So before we move on to training, I wanted to ask, there may be people in the room today or who are watching our webcast who are concerned that because their company didn't prioritize security from the outset, it may be too late. And Josh, I'm wondering if your experience is instructive in promoting security as a part of code development.
I'm not sure I understand the question entirely, but
Well, in a company that hasn't necessarily adopted security as a core value from the very beginning, is it too late?
no, absolutely not. So National Instruments has been around for over 50 years, and it was only about 5 years ago that I said, I want to be the security guy. I want to start the security program. You can imagine all the things that go wrong with a company over 50 or so years, right? It's no small task. But that doesn't mean that it can't be done. So for companies that aren't startups, aren't building these things from scratch, there is still hope for you. You can absolutely, if you have the right people in place and they're championing it. I think that's the reason why I kind of take the approach of the cheerleader, is because if you can get everybody to start talking about security and thinking about security and kind of spreading that gospel, at the lower levels, eventually that has its way of feeding up and up and up, and it becomes part of the culture of the organization. Security, you can try to mandate it, but the fact is, if somebody is sitting at their desk and they don't care about security, they're not going to do it. It doesn't matter if there's a mandate for it or not. It doesn't matter if they're threatened to be fired or not. They have to actually care about doing things securely, and so it takes cheerleaders at that lowest level kind of injecting security in the process. Individual members on the team saying, yeah, I think we should think more about this, or did you consider this? Hey, I pen tested that app, I found this, right? It takes those kind of people who are going to be proactive because they actually care to drive it back up. So there is hope for you if you have a larger organization that is still around. We're still working on it at National Instruments. It's not perfect, but we've seen tremendous improvement over the last 5 or so years.
Okay, so we talked a bit about training and the resources that are available in the security community, and these are not necessarily expensive or even costly resources. Josh, you mentioned OWASP and the ISSA, and there are others. But before we actually dive in on training, I thought it would be useful for us to talk very briefly about common vulnerabilities. We know from news reports, for the folks who are not engineers in the room, that code vulnerabilities are common, and Commissioner McSweeny identified a number of them that are in the news today. In your experience, well, let's see. Are there resources in the security community that can help developers to learn about common vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, the OWASP Foundation, that is its core mission, is to educate people on security. Here in Austin, we have LastCon, which is OWASP Foundation local chapters conference. Just happened like a week ago here in Austin. And it's an amazing opportunity to get together and learn about different security vulnerabilities and things like that. So OWASP Foundation is extremely active, lots of resources. Our local chapter is extremely active. And if you go on the website, if you want a proxy tool to be able to, test your application, they have proxy tools. If you want to, play around with different types of vulnerabilities, they have WebGoat to do that. They have developer guides. The OWASP Foundation is this huge organization, volunteers literally from all over the world, translated into multiple different languages. And that is the reason why they exist, is to make sure that security is driven in the organizations and that you guys have the resources for free to be able to do what you need to do.
So we've got a slide up now that's just the OWASP top 10. Josh, if I could just impose on you a bit longer to describe briefly what the OWASP top 10 is.
Yeah, so the OWASP top 10 is the top 10 application security risks. And basically what happens is there's a group of people who go and they kind of look at data from all sorts of different vendors out in the area, people in the space, and they say, okay, what are the vulnerabilities that we're seeing in applications? What are the common vulnerabilities? What are the causes of these things? How do they impact the applications, the users, things like that? And then it's an awareness document. This is not the complete list of all the vulnerabilities that you should care about, but these are certainly vulnerabilities that you should care about because they exist in tons and tons of applications. And so, it kind of starts off with injection flaws at the top, which is a very broad category. But these are most of the attacks that you hear about. It's SQL injection. It's people being able to write queries into a database, and then the database returning, here's everything I have, right? I think the number 3 on there, that is by far the most common vulnerability that we see in any application. And I think we got a slide on
We
that,
do,
right?
yeah. So if we could, and the third is cross-site scripting.
Yep.
So Josh, can you just describe what cross-site scripting,
Yeah.
what the vulnerability is?
Yeah, so the idea behind cross-site scripting is you have an application, and think of, a lot of applications will take in, like, what is your name? And so you enter your name, I'm Josh Sokol, and you hit submit. And then at the very top corner of the page, it says, hello, Josh, right? Well, you think about where that data comes from. That data is coming from inside the database, and that data is returned from the content that the user put. So cross-site scripting happens in any place where there's user injectable information, whether it's via the URL or the database or JavaScript land, right? And then it gets reflected back onto the page content. So cross-site scripting, it's in almost every application I ever wrote in the past when I didn't know better, right? And it's because it's super common for you to just take data from a user, trust it, and then pop it back out on the page like it's no big deal. So it's present in 7 out of every 10 web applications. I think that was from a Sensic vulnerability report a year or two ago. It doesn't matter what language you choose. So this is all about kind of programming archetypes. It has nothing to do with the language itself. So if you're taking data in, not validating it, not encoding the outputs, and then displaying back into the page content, you have this vulnerability. And then the net effect is that an attacker can run malicious scripts in the victim's browser. So this isn't an attack on the application itself, right? It's not going to compromise your company. It's not going to get data out of the database. What it's going to do is it's going to compromise the user of the application. So it means that user's browser is going to be under an attacker's control. They're going to redirect them to another page to load an ActiveX component to compromise their system. They're going to steal cookies, and so they're going to have the account credentials that user accesses the application with. So it's a very significant vulnerability, but it's not one that a lot of people think about because you're all about protecting the keys to your kingdom. You're not even thinking about the impact to the users and their usability of the application and the data that's valuable to them that they're entrusting you to protect.
So can training mitigate the risks of cross-site scripting and other common vulnerabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few different tools here. One is going to be training, obviously. If you can go out and, we did a free training at LastCon. We had about 100 people that came out, and Dan Cornell and I talked for a whole day about application security, and we shared all the different techniques for attacking these applications and how to protect the applications and things like that. That resource, that slide deck, and actually we recorded the entire day's worth of training, that's going to be up on the OWASP Foundation website. So you can get that information, you can use it internally. Even our entire PowerPoint slide deck is up there as of yesterday. So you guys can have that kind of thing. There's all sorts of applications. The OWASP Foundation has a tool called ZAP, Zed Attack Proxy. You can point that at your application and say, scan it, and it'll find cross-site scripting vulnerabilities for you. The fortunate thing here is that there's a very distinct pattern that tools are excellent at recognizing. So, those kind of things, absolutely. You can train your developers, you can run tools against the applications, and it's, cross-site scripting especially, it's very easy to find those vulnerabilities. But it's still present in 7 out of 10 applications. So.
And how about the OWASP cheat sheet?
Oh, yeah. So OWASP cross-site scripting prevention cheat sheet. So what OWASP has done is they've created this whole cheat sheet series. And so for pretty much every item in the OWASP top 10, there's a cheat sheet associated with it. And that cheat sheet is about a page long, and it outlines, for this vulnerability, here's what it is, and here's how you can attack it or test for it, and then here's how to mitigate against it. So for cross-site scripting, there's a cross-site scripting prevention cheat sheet. I think if you just search in Google OWASP XXS cheat sheet, it'll be the first link that comes up. And these are excellent resources. If you go and you test and you find that vulnerability, hand that cheat sheet to the developer and say, here's all the information you need. Just use this and go forward.
Okay, so let's turn to training more generally. Certainly it provides opportunities to grow a developer's skills, but when is it appropriate to begin security training? I know, Chris, you talked a little bit about what you do at Retail Me Not. Can you tell us more
Yeah, so part of the onboarding of any new engineer is educating them about our posture on security, but also what are the main things, usually leveraging also the OWASP Top 10, what they are, educating, providing them resources. Then there's, after that, there's a continued education with the tech talks at regular interval. But another part of education, or how we figure out what to educate, is doing what you call the hackathon, also called a frackathon, where you team up the teams against each other, and you gotta either take data out of your other team, or you got to do a DDoS on one area to access the other one, or disable. It's find the security. It's a lot of fun. But also, by looking at that, you can start to find the patterns of what are your engineering team, what are the holes in their education. And so then you can leverage that and say, okay, we need to talk more about this area or that area, and continuing all that. And it's a lot of fun. It's a good boost also for the morale of the engineers, because they love to mess with each other. So it's leveraging that.
You know, Suzanne talked a little bit earlier about UT Austin's program around security training and things like that. Back when I was a student at UT, there was no real security program. I think my security came from a networking class that I had at UT. And it's unfortunate, but as a startup, you have to consider that a lot of the students that you get out of school, and this is changing, but a lot of those students that you get out of school, they don't have that security background. They're taught to program. They're taught to write code, not necessarily write secure code. And the same thing goes for a lot of the experienced people out there. Unless if there was a reason for them to learn secure coding, chances are they took one of these programs, they learned, either on their own or through a university where security wasn't taught. And so you have to kind of go into this with the assumption that they don't know secure programming. They can write code, all day and all night, and it's decent code, but it's not secure code. And so, as a company, you have to recognize that and, provide the resources to get them up to speed. Maybe that's giving them time to attend the OWASP meetings, or time to look at some videos online, or whatnot. Or maybe it's more formalized training within your company, like we do. Yeah.
Alan, how does Dell onboard new employees, including folks that Dell gets by acquisition, who might represent more like the small business community here?
So any employee onboarded at Dell goes through a plethora of different training courses, which is, depending on the business unit you fall into, there's other additional particular compliance or security type of training. Everybody has a generalized security training. We're trying to build a security mindset at the core, regardless of what you do. And then in the developer communities, then we have a fairly large number of very formal CBT-based secure development training courses, and they're typically the number one taken training course across the company.
So, Chris, at the outset today, that you talked about being sure to be cognizant of the data that a company is collecting. Does in your experience, is training about that aspect of code development in terms of thinking about the inputs? Is that useful?
Yes, very useful and very important, because your application, you can have cross-site scripting, but if you have your data laying around, let's put it as unattended or sprinkled, you opening yourself to all kind of other issues. That's where whiteboarding any new projects. I know engineers are used to whiteboard, but many times they forget the whiteboarding aspect of let's whiteboard with the security in mind, and let's whiteboard with the PII in mind, and where we keep it. And all that allows for better knowledge of where it is, and they're more cognizant about the problem. But also, as you grow and you start to have multiple products in multiple areas, it allows you to detect also what are things that we're doing over and over in the company. For instance, you have usernames, right? And instead of every team doing their own thing and therefore multiplying the risk of security, you start to think about, okay, we're going to create a common system, extremely secure, with an API, create a moat around it. And
I definitely,
code
I
it.
want to get to that in just a moment, but because creating that moat seems like something that would promote efficiencies, particularly in a small company. But before we get there, I just, before we leave the subject of training, I wanted to ask Alan in particular whether networking, and that's something that Josh talked about earlier this morning, whether that can help a developer to grow his or her security experience and their expertise.
Yeah, I think so. And to Josh's point earlier, is as much as I like to push security from the top down, that networking aspect really grows it from the roots up. And when you've got, and you encourage, and I can't talk hardly enough about local chapters like OWASP, they are invaluable, because that's where people come together. And even if you're not that motivated by security, but you go there because you're a developer and you want to understand and you want to learn, the reality is by the time you leave a day-long LASCON conference or go to an OWASP chapter, you're immediately more motivated. And that's where we're trying to encourage our developers and our security teams to attend more of those types of things and allow them, take the day, go there. We'll work out how to get you. They're local, they don't really incur any travel costs. And the wealth of knowledge and just the attitudes that they return with is significant. And a lot of that is just in the general networking with like-minded people.
That's very helpful. So I'd like to turn now to something that Christoph alluded to just a moment ago, which is, you described it as whiteboarding, and Alan also talked about threat modeling. But if you could just set the stage for folks who might not be familiar with it, what is threat modeling, and why is whiteboarding something, even before you've begun to develop it, important?
I think we mentioned it, is that security can be seen as this very complicated and daunting thing, and having part of a whiteboard demystifies a little bit the whole aspect of it and make it clear in the view of the engineer. This is my app. How can how can somebody really mess with it? How can somebody get into that information, and where am I storing it? And that makes it very clear and visible and understanding. And it also helps when you have to explain, if we don't do X, this is why it's going to happen. It's clean, it's simple, and it allows to provide a very top view architecture. And as I mentioned, detecting those areas that are duplicated over and over. And so you can decide, we're going to make that a service that is extremely secure, and we keep very, very well tight, instead of risking opening more and more for accessing the same information different way.
And when's the right time to engage in that exercise, the whiteboarding of a product?
Early on, if you can. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Alan talked a little bit earlier about the cost as you move through the different, think of it as like a waterfall methodology, right? As you move from concept all the way to we're in production and support, it's roughly an order of magnitude each step along the way in terms of the cost. And threat modeling helps you to, at that very early design concept phase, start thinking about the security challenges around your application. And so if you can start doing threat modeling at that stage, you're fixing it before the code's ever even been written. You are looking at kind of architecture level, high level, design level, how is this application going to function, and you can find issues and fix them before you've ever written any code.
Yeah, I think the threat modeling aspect really helps paint that picture of where you have potential vulnerabilities within your application or within whatever you're trying to design, because you can very simply put down, okay, well, I'm going to here are my inputs and here are my outputs, and my inputs could be credit card information, and then that should trigger, okay, well, that's really important. Okay, well, where are my trust boundaries of, okay, I'm putting credit card information over here, this is internet facing, I'm storing it over here, is that still internet facing or not? Or how do I ensure that I've got the appropriate controls in place? And something we haven't really touched on is ensuring that your organization has a well-defined set of security policies and standards. You're going to go through that threat model, and it's easier, and it's obviously easier in a large organization with a security program where I've got consultants that can sit and help facilitate a threat model with an application development team who don't necessarily appreciate that, because they can say, all right, application team, whiteboard how this works, inputs, outputs, where are the trust boundaries, what type of data goes here, and then we can say, okay, well, that's credit card information, and per our standard, credit card information is considered highly confidential, and our standard dictates that in transport at rest that needs to be encrypted with this. So it becomes very methodical, and that we can help highlight, okay, here's that gap, now refer to the standard about how you're going to go deal with that. But we've already immediately recognized within a few minutes of whiteboarding, okay, we're dealing with very sensitive information, and this is very, very important, and we can go focus on that.
Maybe rewind for a second. And the threat modeling, for those who don't know, is basically looking at the data flow of your application and looking at the different components of your application, the different functions or systems that are involved with that, how they interact, how data is moving from one system to the next, what the different data stores are, whether it's file or database related, and how that information is moving within the system. So what threat modeling is doing is it's looking at all those different components, and you're looking for ways to break them, places where you should have authentication, but you're not doing any sort of authentication, or places where you should have encryption and you're not encrypting. That's what threat modeling is effectively looking at.
So we talked about the fact that it's never too early to engage in threat modeling, but once you've done it, is it complete, or is it necessary to engage in threat modeling every time you roll out a new feature or otherwise update the product?
Yeah, it's a constant process. You have to keep going because you might be starting grabbing another set of information, and where does it go? How does it match with others? And if you don't do that, next thing you know, you have a new data store somewhere within a PII that is widely open. Well, you have your credit card really well secure, but you have all social security numbers there. And so having constantly that process of looking at how the data goes in, goes out, where it should be, and control is very important. You have to keep going.
I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say the data flow diagrams that are used for threat modeling aren't just security objects. They can be used by your support organizations, by your architects, by your developers. I think back to the days when I was on the web systems team at NI, and if I had a data flow diagram for every application that was out there, if something's broken, I can look at that data flow diagram and be like, okay, that's where it's not working. That's where it's broken. If you don't have that level of documentation, it involves a lot more troubleshooting, a lot more steps. So the kind of pieces that go into a threat model are far more valuable even outside of security.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a great point, and I wonder if there's a concrete step or steps that the folks in the audience who are thinking, gosh, threat modeling is something that I want to integrate in my company, what they can do in the immediate term, in the intermediate term, and in the longer term to integrate that in their software development.
Yeah, the first step is knowing your applications. Unfortunately, that's something a lot of organizations can't even tell you what applications they have because it's so dynamic. It's changing every day. We've gotten into a place where some companies are pushing code multiple times a day, if not hundreds of times a day. So keeping track of that is difficult. But the first step is knowing what's out there and knowing how the different pieces work. So if you can have a diagram that says, this piece is here, we use this database, here's data flowing from this thing to this thing, that's an excellent place to start. And then at some point you can have a security person come in and they'll ask the questions. They'll say, okay, well you're storing data in this database, it's got some credit card information, is that encrypted? Is that data source encrypted? Is the data as it's getting stored encrypted? They'll help you to kind of navigate that path. But the first step is having those diagrams available.
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, but before we close, I want to talk a bit about secure frameworks, even though I think that you've covered this waterfront well, Christophe. But before we take some questions, I want to make sure that our audience understands why standardizing security-sensitive procedures is both important from a security perspective and efficient from a business perspective.
Yeah, it's security is also a lot about control and making sure we have those checks and totals and make sure everything passed through. And so having one point to control and if there's a threat come in, it has to go through this. It's your choke point. So it's extremely important and also very efficient because the risk of multiplying the code in all over the place multiplies your risk and also wastes your engineering time of coding the same thing over and over.
And so how have you addressed that without getting into anything that's trade secreted, but how have you addressed that at Retail Me Now?
We've developed APIs and centralized system that are highly secure, that are accessed by access control to it, that encrypts all the data. And so if you need to access this type of information, this is how you access it, this is where it is. And if you need to store, this is where it's, based on the type, this is where it's going, or things like how it should be encrypted and written.
And so your developers then are not reinventing the wheel if they need
Correct.
to access that information. For
Yeah,
example.
and at the beginning, of course, every developers will be like, "Well, you're telling me how to do my stuff," but when they see the impact and the risk that happen, and if they don't do it the right way, and then they're going to have to redo the work, nobody likes to do the work twice. So they see the benefit fairly quickly after that, and it's just smooth sailing.
Alan kind of mentioned it earlier. It starts with policies, right? You have to look at your organization. Passwords is a good example. You look at your organization. Does your organization have a password policy? Does it define, how long your passwords need to be, how complex they need to be? And so you need to define those policies that set up the expectations for the people in your organization. And then from there, you move a step further and you say, okay, do we have the right frameworks in place to enforce those policies? It might be something like OWASP, for example, has the Enterprise Security API, or SAPI. That's a framework that you can actually build your code on top of that helps to enforce a lot of those things. It provides some structure for encryption and for input validation, output encoding, those kind of things. So it's that's. You start with the policy, what does your organization need to do, and that's applicable across the board, and then you start looking at how do we actually create frameworks and things like that to enforce those policies.
Well, and with that, I think that we have an opportunity to take some questions from the audience. We have, I think, a couple of students with microphones. There they are. So if you can raise your hand if you've got a question for our panel, we will go from there. We've got one here in the front. And if I could just ask you to introduce yourself, both for the folks on the webcast and the folks in the room.
Sure. My name is Mona Rao. I'm a director of security at a startup, a very early stage startup, so I'm very excited to be here, so thank you for that. A question, since the theme is on startups, and I come from a company, I just joined the company recently, but I come from a company where there was enough education, awareness in the management level, as well as resources in terms of money and budget to be able to do the right thing. You were able to say, okay, fine, this is your biggest issue, this is the kind of money you need, because at the end of the day, to tell you the truth, security does involve cost. At some point, it is not just one person's job. It involves a lot of people, and I understand that, building the culture from ground up. But then at the end of the day, when it comes to mitigating some of the issues, it ends up being whether you implement a tool, whether there are resources needed to train. So my question is essentially for a startup, as a one-person team, if I were to say that this is my biggest issue that I could possibly mitigate, one of my majority of the concerns or security issues, would all of you agree that application security, obviously where is the biggest exposure we have? We are we have an application that sits on the internet. It's a SaaS application. It's available 24/7. So, I am thinking in terms of how do I make sense of the world of security issues out there as a small company. But if I were to say that, there is one aspect where I could start my journey and say this is where the biggest impact is going to happen, with perhaps, the most amount of, time and effort and dollars put in, would we agree that application security right now would be the top concern?
Maybe I'll take a stab at that. I think you have to look at what does your company do. It's because it could be if your company revolves around a product and that product has a deficiency in such a way that it goes offline, it goes down and get compromised, what is the brand damage, what is the impact to your business? If you're building a product, but really that in itself isn't the problem. You've got underlying infrastructure that it's dependent on. Maybe infrastructure is a greater concern, because if you take the infrastructure away, you have no product. And so I think it really, take a step back and think, what is it that your company is doing? What is it that's important? And what is the biggest impact in making that product successful?
So I would go back to what we talked about further, which is risk management. Really, what we're talking about here is evaluate the risks in your environment. Mm-hmm. Look at those, determine what the likelihood is, determine what the impact is, look at the asset values and things like that, and then take that and evaluate, where do I put my time and energy into? You're going to put your time and energy into the things that are going to have the biggest impact on your environment, and that might be your application. We don't know enough about the company or the assets or anything like that to really be able to tell you. I guess from my OWASP hat on, yes, application security is the most important thing that you can focus on. But in reality, it's all about, every organization is a unique snowflake, right? And we need to make sure that we're doing our risk management and we're finding out what that is.
You could have the biggest, most scary application vulnerability, but if the impact to your business is actually really low and the probability of it really being discovered is also relatively low, maybe it's not that important. And Josh has mentioned several times risk, and I think that is fundamentally where you start. You've got to have a risk framework that you all buy into, and then it becomes, if you're the sole security person in your organization, your founders have brought you in to be the security voice, and you need to be able to go and have that objective, tangible conversation based on, here are the 1, 2, or 100 different security risks that I see at this point in time with our company, and I have prioritized them based on this particular, whatever framework you want to go align those two to define probability and risk. And then you sit down and say, okay, these top 5, they're all huge, and 4 of them are really, really cheap to go mitigate. We're going to go focus on those. But number 3 in the top 5, maybe $10 million, and it's just not worth going to mitigate.
And before we move on to the next question, I'd be remiss if I didn't echo what our panelists said earlier today, which is, consider the data, and again, I don't know your application, but consider the data that your application either collects or transmits or stores, and think about the impact on consumers, because certainly that is one aspect that we consider in our enforcement actions. So I think we had a question over here as well.
Hi, I'm Alec. I work at Atlassian as a security engineer. And I'm touching on threat modeling a little more. I'm kind of curious what you guys do, because you kind of mentioned this, and I do agree that threat models need to be kind of a living document that are revisited. And you mentioned whiteboarding. I don't know if you meant that literally or not, but how do you go about keeping the threat model alive and active? And if you have any specific tools, or do you just kind of guess at what threats are applicable to a certain portion of a model, or do you use something like Microsoft's threat modeling tool? And then after you've done that, what do you do to kind of keep it alive and always evolving?
Well, we have multiple tools where we track all that based on the different audience. There's the one that goes to with our legal department, threat modeling, that reports to the risk and audit committees. But more closer to your world with this engineering and all that is we have Excel and a wonderful Atlassian product on Confluence. And so we track a lot of information in there. And depending also on the level of things we detect. If something we detect is actually the impact is really high, the risk is really high, and it needs to be fixed quickly, many times we'll delay. But we keep that information flowing. It's having engineers posting when they find new things where something is detected. And it's all linked to, of course, to tools like Jira to follow all that. So that's how we lose those tools, because when you have we start to have a lot of engineers, having a single tool where everybody can fit in, is difficult, and therefore having something that is already part of the how the engineers behave and they're used to use, leverage those is very important, and has been quite efficient for us.
But in a small enterprise, I thought an aspect of the question that was interesting was, would it actually be valuable to get out a whiteboard and to collaborate in a room with the folks who are designing the code?
Oh yeah, no, the whiteboard was a literal aspect. It was not. It's what happens after and how you track the constant, the threat or new threat coming in, or attention and risks, and how you follow that.
Coming back to the culture discussion from earlier, a lot of this is driven by your culture, and you need to create a culture where people are willing to sit together and collaborate, and where the developers aren't afraid to talk to the security people. They know the security team is going to think rationally, not beat them over the head with a compliance stick, whatever, because that's going to encourage them to talk to you when, hey, this app is changing, we're storing it here, or we decide not to do this or whatever. Then you can have meaningful conversations about what's going on in your environment. If they're afraid to talk to you, you'll never know about that. You'll never be able to reevaluate the threat model.
Well, this has been a terrific discussion, and I'm sorry that we don't have time for more discussions, more questions rather, on this panel. We are going to have a short break now. We will resume at 11:15, but at about a few minutes before we resume, we're going to show you a new video that was launched today by the Federal Trade Commission about security. So if you're back in the room for that, it sounds really cool in the surround sound in this room. So thank you.